Our guest tonight was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and a presidential candidate. He's currently the United States Secretary of Transportation. Please welcome back to the show, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Hello, how are you, Secretary?
Hey, good to see you. I'm doing well, thanks.
I guess that's the first thing I want to ask you is how are you adjusting to the new title? People knew you obviously as Mayor Pete for a long time. How is Secretary Buttigieg fitting you?
You know, they say once a mayor, always a mayor, so I'm always happy to answer to Mayor Pete, but I'm certainly excited to be the secretary.
You got off to a sort of inauspicious start in that you had to quarantine after being exposed. How was quarantine for you? Was it as difficult as it's been for many people?
You know, I didn't love it, but I'm glad to be on the other side of it. This morning, I took the dogs out for a walk before breakfast, and it just felt, even though it was gray and icy, it felt fantastic just to be outdoors again. And obviously, you know, we're urging people to be careful, to take every safety measure, and it was important to me to make sure we're practicing what we preach.
And so this was your first Oval Office meeting. Obviously, you couldn't be there in person, so you were wheeled in on a big screen TV. How was that as an experience?
Yeah, I mean, like most Americans, right? I've always wondered what it's like inside the Oval Office. And the first time in my life, I'm actually invited to go into the Oval Office for a meeting. And it's in like this disembodied form, right? Coming in on a TV cart by Zoom. So basically the most 2021 thing that could possibly happen. But yeah, it was a good meeting. White House did a great job of making it possible for me to participate. We were talking with senators from both parties about how important it is to build up our infrastructure. And I'm glad I could be there, even if it had to be in that way.
You mentioned infrastructure, and the previous administration sort of was always promising an infrastructure week that never came. Based on that, I'm wondering what was the state of the department, or how are you finding the state of the department in your early days of the job?
You know, the department has about 55,000 employees, and they're doing fantastic work. But we do need to make sure that we're actually putting our money where our mouth is on infrastructure. There's been a lot of talk about it for years and years. Now we've actually got to do something, and I think we have a chance to do it. It's a huge priority for President Biden. It's something most Americans from both parties want us to do, and we've just got to make sure Washington actually responds. It's a big part of what I feel I'm here to do.
President Biden is proposing billions of dollars in transportation aid in this COVID relief package. Why is money for transportation so important in a time of a pandemic where maybe people think the money could be better spent elsewhere?
Right. So I think a lot of people are asking, well, why would you put transit funding into a bill that's about COVID relief? And let's be clear, the reason this bill is so urgent is because it's about getting relief to Americans. It's about getting shots in arms. But transit and transportation is part of that. I mean, how are people supposed to get their shots if transit agencies around the country are at risk of shutting down or cutting their routes even further if they don't get immediate financial relief? So this package really is about the things that cannot wait, that have to happen right away. It's why it's the top priority of the president and of the administration. And look, most Americans want this to happen, Americans from both parties. We've just got to make sure Congress actually responds.
I think a lot of people maybe fail to see how transportation connects to all different parts of our political life. One other thing it touches is climate change. Do you feel in your position that there's a future for transportation in this country that maybe that maybe takes climate change more into account with what the future law is?
Absolutely. We have to. There's no other choice. Look, the biggest contributor of greenhouse gases in the U.S. economy is the transportation sector. But that means the transportation sector could actually be the biggest part of the solution. And we're seeing that happen in every different form of transportation. We've got to support it. I mean, you look, to take one example, at electric vehicles. More and more we're seeing automakers, including the classic long-time automakers out of Detroit, coming up with ideas for electric vehicles and committing to them and developing them and selling them as we speak. Now, of course, simultaneously, we've got to make sure not only that our cars are greener, but that people have alternatives to driving, that we have good subway systems, that we have good trains in this country. I don't know why Americans should be expected to settle for fewer options for passenger rail than people who live in China or Britain or Italy. We should be the best in all of these fields, and that's what we're calling on Congress to help us do.
Be honest, how excited does the president get when you start talking about trains? Like when high-speed rail comes up, is it a noticeable change in his demeanor?
I mean, he famously loves passenger rail. So I thought I would be the biggest passenger rail enthusiast around, but I think I'll be a close second, but always second place in this administration. He's all over this. And again, I think not just as a personal fondness, but an understanding that so many of the things this administration is here to do, yes, climate, but also creating jobs, delivering equity in this country. These are some of the things that are at stake in the choices we make about our trains, planes, automobiles, ships, and more.
Racial inequality is something else that is affected, very much by access to things like public transportation. Is that something that's sort of near the front of your list as well? Although I am mentioning a lot of things that would be at the front of your list, I understand.
Yeah, but we've got to do all these things at once: safety, climate, equity, and jobs. And yes, when it comes to equity, racial equity is a huge part of that. Look, I know when you're thinking about racial justice in this country, Department of Transportation may not be the first thing to pop into your mind, but think about the Montgomery bus boycott. Think about Rosa Parks. The history of civil rights in this country has always been very closely tied to the question of equity in transit and transportation. And it's not just about what neighborhoods get the subway stop or what communities get the investment, but also the fact that, frankly, in this country, we have a legacy of investments happening at the expense of communities of color. So many Black neighborhoods, for example, that were sometimes destroyed or literally cut in two by a highway project going through them. That's something that has happened in this country, and not just in the distant past, but in very recent memory. And it's something we could fix and do something about if we have racial equity in mind as we make the next set of transportation decisions for this country.